Good evening, everyone. My name is John Hughes. I'm the music director of the Chicago Master Singers, and welcome to another session of CMS University. I'm really glad you're here. During this time of social distancing and staying at home, it's really important that we keep this community together, and not just together, but vibrant and growing. And that's where these sessions came about, right? We're trying to maintain and grow our musicianship during this time, and come back as strong as ever when it's safe to do so. Whether you're a member of CMS or you're checking us out through the power of the internet, maybe you're watching it live, maybe you're watching a recording, I'm really glad you're here. Now, if you are watching it live, you're in luck because you can actually participate in this. So the first step really is crucial, and that is that you log in to YouTube. After you do that, then you can participate in the chat, which is already quite active on the right-hand side of your screen. You can say hi to each other, make a question, or ask a question, make a comment, have an exchange, kind of like you're passing notes during class, and join in the fun. It's a lot more fun if you're an active participant rather than just a casual observer. The other cool thing that you can do is ask me a question, and I will be able to put your questions up on the screen and answer them to the best of my ability. I just ask so that it is easy for me that you start any questions or comments intended for me with 4 question marks in a row. That way, when I do look over to my right throughout the evening, it'll quickly catch my eye. Okay, without any further ado, let's get into our topic tonight, which is intonation in the choral ensemble. This means singing in tune, and it is a little different in some ways when we're singing in a choir because we're listening differently than if we were a soloist with a piano. We're thinking about how we're integrating with and interacting with other parts. Now, before I get much farther, I want to just quickly acknowledge the main source of tonight's session, which is this book by Gunnar Aldol called Choral Intonation. Aldol is a professor of ear training at the Stockholm Conservatory, and he really does a fine job in this book of making this subject matter accessible, while at the same time going into enough depth. This book is not very thick; it's maybe 100 pages or so, but it's very, very useful. So, if you're interested in this topic, want to learn more, I highly recommend this book. And thankfully, it is in an English translation for those of us who don't speak Swedish. All right, so here's the plan for tonight. We're going to talk about the physics behind sound, and then we're going to talk about things that affect intonation, how we sing in tune or not. Then we're going to talk about the different systems and types of intonation, and there are more than one, so stay tuned for that. And then I'll give you some musical examples with kind of how we can think about intonation when we're singing pieces. So first, the physics behind sound. Now, one thing I just want to preface tonight's discussion with is that there are really 2 sides to the same coin when we're talking about intonation. On one hand, there is the very objective side, which is based in physics and math. On the other side, though, there's the subjective, which is a little less nebulous, or a little bit more nebulous, but equally important. So throughout this evening, it will kind of alternate between these 2 sides. And hopefully at the end, you'll come away with an understanding of some both concrete and maybe less concrete ideas about how to improve your intonation. All right, we're going to start with the physics behind sound, so that more objective side. I'm going to show you an example from this Aldol book here, and this is showing the harmonic spectrum or overtone series here. So you'll notice here at the very bottom, we're looking at this example 76, that these numbers at the bottom are hertz, measurements of frequency from physics. That's the unit of measurement. So if I play a low C here, that is at 66 hertz. If I play 66 times 2, 132, that'll produce an octave. If I add another 66 hertz to that, I'll get a fifth above that. Another 66 is 264 hertz. That gives me middle C, then 330, 396, 462, etc. So you'll notice that, as he says here, we kind of have whole number ratios of 1 to 2, 1 to 3, 1 to 4, 1 to 5. We're adding the fundamental, which is this low pitch, 66. We're adding that number to itself over and over, and that's producing all these pitches. And you'll notice he ends with this kind of ellipses, so it's as if this sequence goes on forever, like numbers do in math. So the point of me starting tonight by showing you this is that I want you to realize that these pitches weren't just invented. They were to some extent derived from the overtone series, from math and physics, right? And we'll talk more about how that looks in a little bit, but I just wanted to preface our discussion with the very fundamental, if you will, of basis of sound. Okay, now let's go on to something a little bit more subjective, and that is things that affect our intonation, but maybe can't be measured quite as easily. So things that help our intonation are being aware of our breath, right? Not only the support, but our airflow. Managing those two things well so that at the end of the phrase, when we're running out of air, we don't sound like a birthday balloon a week after the party that's half deflated. So managing that support and airflow is really important. Resonance also contributes to intonation. A note like this, ah, is going to tune much better than a note like this, ah, right? It might be the same frequency, right? We might measure that the same at 440 or something, but just the way it works in reality is that resonance will tune much better. Vocal color, same idea, right? We sing a nice, beautiful ah, ah. That'll tune way better than ah, right? Both are the same pitch, maybe the same vowel, right? It's an ah vowel, but one is sung with beauty. Ah, and that'll tune better as well. Another thing maybe specific to choir is that we have to think about balance, right? We're singing with other people. So one of the tricks that we often talk about as choir directors is the pyramid, right? With the lowest voices, the basses at the bottom, notice that they're the biggest sound, and the sopranos at the top are the smallest, right? So that we are using the physics and the overtones to reinforce our tone color and our sound. And part of that is being aware of what note you're singing in the chord. And we'll talk about that when we get to the musical examples. All right, things that might hurt our intonation. Be physical alignment, right? I know I'm preaching to the choir. You're all watching a live stream on a Monday night. So you've heard choir directors say, make sure you're holding your instrument correctly, right? Our body's our instrument. But you don't have a chance if you're singing like this to sing in tune. So we have to raise our sternum, lower our shoulders, and stand and hold our instrument correctly, right? So there's an element of physical alignment, making sure that this is all in line to produce a beautiful tone that can tune. Our mood and energy. You might notice toward the end of a long rehearsal, you might be tired and you might get a little flat. Tension in the jaw or tongue or a raised larynx, any kind of physical issue, again, can influence and hinder our intonation and make it harder to sing in tune. Again, our bodies are our instrument, and it's unfortunate that singing is not like playing a different instrument where it's like, well, the problem is your finger is like this, or you're not completely covering the hole. We can't see our instrument, right? So we have to be a much more aware of our own issues and solve them ourselves by being really aware of how our body works. And we'll talk about that more in a session coming up in a couple weeks on vocal health and warm-ups. So stay tuned for that. Again, unfocused resonance isn't going to tune very well. Same with ununified vowels, right? It's not just enough for me in the tenor section to sing ah. If the basses are singing ah, it's not going to tune, right? So we all have to be singing that same lifted vowel with the same color, well balanced, and that will tune then. Sorry, basses, I don't mean to pick on you. All right, let's go to another way to think about this. Certain things are going to tend to go flat. So slow or soft pieces, low pieces, a darker overcolor, oh, oh, right? That's going to tend to sound flat. Even if you're singing the correct number of hertz, it's going to sound flat. Melodic leaps also tend to be flat. We tend to overshoot descending leaps or undershoot ascending leaps. Sharp, choirs very rarely go sharp. Frankly, if we're working on an unaccompanied piece and we go sharp in rehearsal, frankly, I'll be kind of happy, right? Usually pieces and choirs tend to flatten over time. As energy dissipates, we might get tired. So sharpness isn't quite as much of a problem, but things that can cause it are things that are faster, louder, higher, a brighter tone. All of that might get that pitch to climb up higher and higher. Okay, a couple maybe less obvious things to talk about with that affect intonation. One is diction, right? How we say the words. So I like to start warm-ups, or in our warm-up sequence, to sing just the 5 pure vowels. I, O, right? And I'm trying to get them all kind of in the same placement and the same color, right? So it doesn't sound like 5 different vowels going a, e, I, O, U, I, O. So I'm practicing that. That's really important because when we're singing kind of traditional Western bel canto music, we want our vowels to be those 5, right? Now, unfortunately, in all the languages, right, very rarely are you singing a pure vowel, especially in a language like English, right? We have all these mixed vowels, like back, ack, right? That's not a pure vowel at all. So we as singers need to cheat and modify the vowel toward one of the pure vowels. So if you were, the example I like to use for this is Danny Boy. If you're singing, but come he back, right? That's not going to tune with other voices. So you need to modify that vowel toward eh, but come he back, right? We still understand the word as back, but it sounds much more beautiful. Back when summer's, right? So we have to have that awareness that, again, even if you're singing the right pitch in terms of hertz, it's not going to sound in tune. It's going to sound flat if you sing that mixed vowel. So you really have to go for the pure vowel all the time. Another big issue is these pitched versus unpitched consonants. Something like love, love. That L is actually pitched, right? And we want to make sure that we're starting on that pitch instead of love, right? That's not going to put us in a good spot. And it probably won't give us a very pure vowel if we do that. Love, because at the same moment that you pop open to the ah vowel, you've also got to raise the palate. Where if you start on the pitched consonant, love, you can almost have your palate lifted when you're singing that. So diction is huge to sing in tune, especially when we're singing with other people like we do in a choir. Another thing that really, really influences intonation is the piano. The piano's great, right? Because it is efficient, it gives you the complete accompaniment, and it's effective, right? If we were learning Messiah, we're not going to rehearse with the full orchestra for 10 weeks or however long we're preparing to do that piece. Rather, we're going to have a piano, and that'll give us a reduction of the whole orchestra. And it helps us learn our notes, it gives us our pitches, it gives us the rhythm, it gives us the accompaniment. It's very, very efficient and effective. The problem, there are really two. there are two problems with rehearsing with the piano. The first is that it promotes a lack of independence, right? It's so good at teaching us our notes and rhythms that we as singers often never really learn to read at a high level. And I've talked about that a lot in the musicianship series, which if you missed, you can go back on our YouTube channel and watch. But the piano is a crutch often. The other problem is that the piano is out of tune. And I don't mean just, it needs to be tuned every 6 months or so. No, I'm saying inherently it's designed to be out of tune. That might be a shock for you, but let's talk about why it's out of tune. And to do that, you really have to understand the different systems and types of intonation. So we're going to talk about 3 tuning systems tonight. The first one is called just intonation. This is derived from the overtone sequence that uses whole number ratios. Remember this thing. It's 66 all the way through, right? So this has a whole number ratio, right? There are no decimal points there. Okay, so this is great because it's in tune. The problem is that transposition is not possible. So don't worry about singing right now. I want you to think about a harpsichord. If I tune it in C using that overtone sequence, that harpsichord will only be in tune in the key of C. It won't be able to play in any other key. So this tuning system's great if you only want to play in one key and don't have any accidentals. And you can see why it's not very popular, because you basically have to have 12 harpsichords, each in a different key, and keep them perfectly in tune in order to play anything. So just intonation isn't really possible for instruments. Pythagorean system, right? This is where all the whole steps are equally sized. This works a little bit better than just intonation, but it still has limitations in terms of transposition. Okay, so what does the piano use? The piano uses something called equal temperament. This means that all the octaves on a piano, the octaves are the only interval that are in tune. They're pure. Everything else then is divided into 12 equal half steps, and they're all equally tempered. They're all equal sized. So this half step from C to C sharp is the same as from B to C, or from F sharp to G. This allows us to then modulate at will, to transpose, to use chromaticism. It really is great, but there are some downsides to it. So the drawbacks are that the fifths on a piano are not really pure. They actually shaved 2 cents off of the fifth to make it work mathematically. This allows the piano to be in tune, quote unquote, with itself. We don't really hear that difference very much. It's pretty negligible to the ear. And it allows then all this chromaticism to be played on the piano, which is great. The other thing is that the pianos treat enharmonic equivalents the same. So F sharp and G flat are the same key on the piano, right? There's not a separate key. But these are actually 2 distinct pitches, and they function differently depending on the harmonic context. The big problem here, and you don't have to understand all the physics behind this, but the problem is that when choirs learn to sing in tune with the piano, they're learning to sing out of tune because the piano's out of tune. Okay, and I'm going to give you some examples about that in a minute. Let's talk about absolute pitch. So you might have heard people say that A equals 440, right? This A above middle C equals 440 hertz. That's kind of the standard, right? Sometimes you hear performances that use a different A, and that's probably could be a whole different CMS University session about the history of pitch and different countries and at different time periods had different designations of what an A equaled. But today, most of us use A as 440 hertz. The problem with this as setting an absolute pitch is that every A actually functions differently depending on its context, as does any other note. I'm just using A as an example. But every note functions differently depending on its context. All right, so what does that mean? Well, there are two types of intonation, really. There's melodic intonation, just how the notes move linearly, and then harmonic intonation, how they function vertically. So, melodic intonation. The melodic context of a particular note can influence how it's intonated. So, for example, Aldol points out that the second and sixth scale degrees tend to be flat, as do descending passages. So this little riff, right? If you were singing the opening of the Bach Toccata and Fugue in D minor, there's a couple trouble spots, even in these two relatively easy measures. The first is that this E is going to tend to be low. That's why I have this little arrow up, right? Part of it is that it's descending. It's that second scale degree, and it's preceded by this half step from F to E, right? We're going to tend to want to sing that low. Then from that E, we go down to a C sharp. And that descending minor third is the absolute hardest interval to sing in tune. It always is flat. So I would, if it were me, my eyebrows would be through the roof trying to sing this. Do, 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 do. Right? You really have to feel like you're ascending, even though this is a descending passage. So being aware of just how the melodic structure is put together can help us kind of stave off some common intonation problems, that this is going to be flat. You can imagine if we were doing this as a warm-up, that if I didn't play along, a lot of choirs might be a quarter step or even a half step flat by that second measure, right? It can easily deflate do, 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 instead of do, 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 right? Nice and high the whole time. So being aware of it can help. The more important thing to really think about, though, is harmonic intonation, right? This is this idea, as Aldol says here, I put the quote up, it's not a safe assumption that an A, like a major third in an F major chord, that's at the top, this A, where the A is the third, that this A should be intonated in the same way as the fifth of a D minor chord. So what Aldol is saying is that this A in an F major chord is different than this D in a D minor chord. Huh. Now, on the piano, I don't have an option, right? That's the only A I can play. But Aldol is encouraging us to really think through what's the difference, right? To prove my point, I'm going to share with you a video that was from a Facebook Live event recently that features the great a cappella group, Take 6, interviewing Jacob Collier. If you don't know Jacob Collier, he's a 20-something British musician who I believe is the greatest prodigy alive today. He plays many, many instruments. He makes these crazy arrangements. He has one of the best ears in the business. And he's just really fun, too. So follow him if you're on Instagram or Twitter or Facebook or YouTube. Check out Jacob Collier. He's really amazing. He does all this stuff, though, where he messes with tuning systems. And in this interview with Take 6, he talks about equal temperament and some of the problems with it and gives examples in a way better than I could ever hope to. So let's just take a couple minutes and watch this video of Jacob Collier. Okay, let me get it set up here.
So equal temperament is the idea that all the semitones on the piano are the same size. they're all equally spaced, right? So that distance is the same as this distance, is the same as this distance. But before, before Bach, you had a completely different system of tuning that was based in physics. And so, you know about the harmonic series. So there's a note and you go, all these harmonics in every note. It's physics. So like a triad comes from physics, because if you sing a loud note in a church or whatever, like a big space, you hear all the overtones come back, and it's like sounds almost like a major chord. So people began to think, okay, a triad makes sense, but if you really want people to play in using triads, it's difficult to modulate because one set of tunings only applies to one key. So if I give an example, the E in C major, if I'm in C and I sing the E that's in the harmonic series, which is like this, it's not in tune with equal temperament at all. That E is flat. It's 14/100ths of a semitone flat, actually. But the E that's the root tonic of E major is completely different. You've got like, and then, so, and then the E, which is the minor third of C sharp minor, is even higher. So it's like, man, crazy. And yeah, so all this stuff is really interesting because basically someone decided at one point that like 12 tones was a cool number. It's like, oh, let's do 12. It's like now we can afford instruments that play in all keys equally, right? And what it meant was a compromise. Like fifths and fourths are pretty in tune, but thirds are bad, really bad. Like the major third on the piano is way too big. The minor third on the piano is way too small. I've done quite a lot of research in this because I love it. But what I love now is like, man, if you're singing Rudolph the Red-Nosed Reindeer, and you go, benevolent poor Rudolph, do-da-do-da-do-da-do. There's no reason why an inner part, the alto, can't go do-do-do-do-do-do. And that's not real. That's because there's only 4 notes. But you can go do-do-do-do-do-do. And that's cool because it's fine. And all the ear hears is tension and release. And so if you make the release in an interesting way that's cool, it's fine. It's just like, wow, you don't need to listen to the piano. You don't have to be locked into anything. It's just you follow your zone, you know?
So maybe we aren't all ready to do arrangements with quarter tones in inner parts, but he does make a good point. Why does the third have to be comprised of 1, 2, 3, 4 equally sized steps? Why not 5 or 6 or 7, right? So Collier's ear is amazing, and I just love how he talks about the E in a C major chord functions so differently than the E in an E major chord. This is something that Aldol talks a lot about in. Let me get to this book here. He kind of comes up with a system of his own where he puts little plus and minus signs and brackets, but just for simplicity's sake, the plus and minus signs mean that those notes should be higher or lower than the piano. So he's basically saying that all these Ds that I've highlighted for you function differently and should be intonated differently depending on what interval they are above the lower voice and even what vowel they are on. So just if I play letter E, this example here, right, on the piano, I don't have any option about how to intonate these 2 notes. But what he's saying is that this note, the 6th, is in tune, or I'm sorry, it's a little sharp, so it needs to be lower. This perfect 5th, remember, it's 2 cents small on a piano, so that needs to be a little bit higher before we get that bright 3rd at the end. So learning to listen and sing with harmonic intonation is really an important step to measure our intervals, like I mentioned last week, in grams, right? Like the British baking show. We're weighing our ingredients, measuring precisely versus, it's 2 cups of sugar. That's rather imprecise, right? And really being able to hear those gradations then is really important. Before we get into some musical examples here, how about we stop and look at the chat and see if there are any questions. I think maybe I've lost you. maybe it's just like, you do you. I don't have any questions on this tonight. But if you do, I'll check the chat in a minute or two. Oh, here's a good question from Ronald Fox. So then this is the limitation of a piano. What happens when the orchestra plays these notes? Yeah, the orchestra hopefully will play in tune, right? And that won't necessarily match the piano, right? And if we were singing a unaccompanied piece, then we could choose to get away from the piano as quickly as possible and work toward just intonation, right? As singers, we don't have the problem, right? We don't have keys on our throat. It's more that there is a little bit of muscle memory. If you only sing with a piano, then you're really learning to sing out of tune versus getting away from the piano as quickly as possible. Then you can let your ear guide you. I think another big thing that choirs often miss is that we tend to rehearse in rather dry rehearsal rooms where it's hard to get a sense of overtones and whether we're singing in tune. So finding a more reverberant rehearsal space allows us to get a better sense of aural feedback of whether we're singing in tune or not, get rid of the piano, and really focus on locking chords. So I hope that's helpful, Ronald. Let's see, another one. Don Newsom, I can adjust my voice versus a piano or chorus, but when I'm singing alone for a virtual choir, well, there I hope you're fitting into the harmonic context of the piano accompaniment, right? When you're singing alone, I just remember that even if you're singing just one voice part, that is implying harmony, right? Go back to the session on harmony, right? Every melody implies certain chords. So one thing that we're going to talk about with the musical examples is learning to sing in tune with the harmony, even if you're not hearing the harmony, right? And when you can start to hear the harmony at a subconscious level and you're singing unaccompanied, if you're tuning to the fundamental pitch, you'll sing much more in tune than if you're just kind of going along singing. So I hope that's helpful. Let's see, a couple more here. Deb Birdsall. So how does perfect pitch work if the piano has static intervals? That's a good question. I don't think it's that I don't have perfect pitch, and so maybe one of the CMS members who does would answer this better. So jump in the chat, Sarah, or others who have perfect pitch. But the way to think about it is that it's not like they were born knowing that this is a G, right? Because why is that a G and not an F? I don't know. It's just what we call it. Rather, what they're really good at is remembering the pitch and just immediately identifying it. But at some point, I believe they had to have learned it. But that's just my opinion. I haven't done a lot of research on that. All right, Rick says, Richard Bouldry gave an example of rehearsing with Cecilia de Bartoli where she was singing an E flat tied to a D sharp and changed the note because the E flat was the root of an E flat chord. That's great, right? So she's a consummate musician and one of my favorite soloists as well. But what she's really doing is thinking about how the note fits, right? So if she's singing do, part of an E major or E flat major chord, do, and then it goes to B major, do, and that E flat becomes a D sharp, it's going to function differently from being the root of the chord, E flat, to the third of a B major chord, right? And on the piano, I can't do anything about that. But as a singer, I can make that adjustment to make sure that it's in tune. Some of this might be intellectual, right? But some of it is also just being, a reflective musician and responding to what you're hearing and not just sitting on a note like, oh, it's tied, it's the same enharmonic equivalent, I'm done. It's really being aware of what's going on around you. I'll stop for questions more in a little bit, but let's go to some musical examples. So the first one we're going to talk about is just one that exemplifies some common melodic issues. This piece is, the piece that I chose to show this is the Liberame by Laios Bardos, the vision of ultimate judgment. This piece is challenging for quite a number of reasons. First of all, it's really built around this descending minor third, which, as we talked about, is really the Diablos di Musica, the musical devil, right? In the Middle Ages, they call the tritone the devil's interval. In my book, the modern devil's interval is that descending minor third. It's very difficult to sing in tune. The other problem with this piece is that it changes registers and dynamics very suddenly. So you'll notice it starts very soft in the lower voices in unison. Right? And it's very fast, agitated, right? Very fast and low and in unison, which is very difficult to sing. Then the other voices come in, the sopranos and tenors come in, still piano and low, and then all of a sudden we crescendo in one beat, which, these beats are going very quickly at 158 beats per minute, right? We crescendo very quickly to forte, then glissando down this tritone, right? So starting here, we have... I can't do the glissando on the piano, but that's very tricky to do, right? To change dynamic and register so quickly tends to be out of tune, as does all this unison, right? It's a lot easier to sing. If CMS were doing this piece, we have 100 voices, right? It's a lot easier to sing 4 parts where we have 25-ish on each part versus 100 on one part, right? You got to get 100 people to do the same thing at the same time. It's just a lot harder, right? So that's another problem spot. This piece is also difficult because of the number of repeated notes that it has. So again, going back to the score here, you'll notice, so at the bottom of the page, we have this, we keep doing the same idea. So we're coming back to that C and G sharp over and over and over again. And it's very easy that just gets a little bit lower every time, right? So part of it is really keeping the pitch up and maintaining that same C over and over. So if I was teaching this piece, I would think about, maybe subdividing down to the 8th note level and really think of 4 C's within this half note, that each one is just as high as the previous one. Finally, at the bottom of this page, the soprano and tenor are in unison, and the alto and bass are in unison, and they're in parallel perfect fourths. Right? So anytime you have parallel perfect intervals, it's hard to sing in tune. And then it's multiplied by 2. The sopranos and altos are in perfect fourths, tenors and basses are in perfect fourths, right? So it's much harder to sing in unison than in parts. And then especially, but if you are in parts, these parallel intervals are hard because they've got to stay right in tune the whole time. So this piece, you might look, oh, it's in unison, it's not too bad. It's really, really difficult, actually. And a lot of what singing in tune to me has to do with is predicting problem spots and trying to get ahead of them, right? So this piece exemplifies a lot of the common melodic issues. Again, just for the record, we have descending minor thirds, sudden shifts in registers or dynamics, repeated notes, and parallel perfect intervals can be tricky. The final example I want to give tonight is common harmonic issues, right? Again, not to beat the proverbial dead horse, but real music does not consist of perfectly, neatly stacked root position chords like this one, right? That's not how real music looks, right? So let's look at this one. This is also an F major chord, but the basses have an A. So this is A, C, F, C. So this is an F major chord, but the basses have the third, not the root, right? So this is in first inversion. Inverted chords are difficult to sing in tune, but they show up in lots of music, and like 3 of the most popular American pieces of all time, The Road Home, Alleluia, and O Magnum Mysterium by Lauridsen, all use inverted chords. So let's look at them and talk about how to prevent singing out of tune. So The Road Home, this actually is the example I just played, that first inversion F chord. Right? So the basses start on this third, but really going back to the point I was making with Don, they've got to not just sing this note kind of in absolute terms, but they have to imagine this low F. Right? So they've got to really tune that A, not to everything else necessarily that's going on, but to above this fundamental that's going on. So if I were teaching this, I would really make sure that we could sing that. I would play this low F and then ask the choir to sing the first chord and make sure that those basses are high enough. They're going to want to be low. And again, this is where I would get away from using the piano and, okay, let's start this piece. That's not helpful because you're teaching them a lack of independence, and maybe the basses aren't going to sing in tune. So play that low F and see if they can give you that, right? And making sure that they can audiate in tune. So that's one piece that uses these inverted chords, and it's tricky to start well. Another one, the Randall Thompson Alleluia, this is in D major, but you'll notice the basses have an A, so this is a second inversion chord, A, D, F sharp, A. So this whole first line, there's not one root position chord until we get to the bottom system. So we really, again, have to really hear this. That's a D. Right? We have to be tuning to this imaginary fundamental. The other problem in this spot is that the tenors are singing a D at triple piano, and look at their first line. Hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. We don't change from a D until this measure, right? And it's very, very hard. A D is the hardest note, I believe, for tenors to sing in tune. It's right on our passaggio, from our lower register to our upper register. And to sing that over and over repeatedly at a soft dynamic is very tricky. So again, kind of having some empathy for singers as a conductor, having some empathy that you know how hard that is to sing in tune. But also as a singer to be aware, okay, this is going to be tricky. I'm going to really have to support this. Even though it says triple piano, maybe I need to sing with as much support as possible in order to sing in tune, right? And also taking good stagger breaths along the way. So this piece can be very tricky to sing in tune as well. Finally, another piece that uses a lot of inverted chords is the Lauridsen O Magnum Mysterium, one of, I believe, the greatest selling piece in choral music history in the United States. This uses first inversion chords throughout. So first inversion D chord, first inversion A chord, first inversion G chord, second inversion D chord. So we all can kind of instantly identify this piece from that first chord. That F sharp in the bass is going to tend to be flat. So what we need to do is, again, hear this low D, and then hear low A. and then a D. Right? So what I would recommend is if we were rehearsing this, rather than playing along, maybe play along, for, it depends on the choir you're working with, but play along until they can muddle through. And then what you need to be doing is, if it were me, playing this. Right? So I'm playing the fundamental, the root of the chord, and nothing else. That then allows singers to be in charge of their own rhythm and counting, but also having some context to sing in. Right? This is something we've talked a lot about throughout these musicianship series that I did for the past 3 weeks about how does my note fit, right? And this is kind of a metaphor for life, right? We're not just doing something on our own in choir. Choir is about singing, and it's really about togetherness, right? And so we have to think about how does our note interact with other people's. And so taking away the false security of the piano and just giving those fundamental or roots of the chords will not only improve intonation, but also kind of foster more independence as well in singers. Before we check the chat one last time, again, I just want to praise the Aldol book. If you're interested in any of this information, a lot of it I got from this. And there are lots of exercises in this book. If you're interested, it's not just up to choir directors to help you sing in tune. So if you're learning a solo or an aria or something, and you want to really make sure you're singing it in tune, I would recommend not playing your part on the piano, but maybe playing just the first note of the left hand of the accompaniment per bar, and really kind of stripping away everything else and learning to sing in tune with kind of the harmonic language of the piece. And that'll help you really get away from equal temperament and start to sing closer to just temperament. All right, let's look at the chat here. I thought I saw a couple questions here. Here's one. Why are perfect intervals harder than other intervals? Why are parallel fifths bad? Well, there's a couple questions going on. You might have heard, in music theory class, never to write a perfect fifth or parallel fifths, something like this, between like the tenor and bass voices. Partly that, we say Bach never did that. It's not that Bach had some like checklist about, all these rules to follow when he was writing his chorale harmonizations. Really, it's just that this doesn't sound very good, right? So Bach would alter, he would fill those intervals out and not write them. And then we kind of anachronistically look back and say, why does Bach's music sound so good? Oh, he never wrote parallel fifths, right? So we want to avoid that. Now, the other part of your question is, why are they harder to sing in tune? It's because they're so pure that you really want to make sure that they're locked in. And you'll notice too, some of this goes back to that initial overtone sequence. Let me just pull that up here. You'll notice that the first couple chords here, or first couple pitches, are all pure intervals, or perfect intervals. So an octave, and then a fifth, and then another octave. And they're only here on the fifth, what's it called? I'm blanking. Overtone or partial, that's what I'm looking for. The fifth partial, do we get a third? And so it really, I believe, for things to be in tune, the fundamental and the perfect intervals above it, the fifth and the octave, really need to be in tune. If that's in tune, and you're in a church and you're singing C, G, C, you should get an E if it's a reverberant enough space and you have you're singing right in tune. those other notes will be there, and then you really only have to reinforce them with singing. They're already in the room. And so, again, that's where balance comes in, right? That we're aware, okay, if the tenors and basses are singing this, and maybe the altos have the E, that it's kind of already in the room and they don't have to push it, right? They're just supposed to kind of fit into the sleeve of the sound, so to speak. Let's see if there are any other last minute questions for me. I think we're good. I want to say thank you very much for coming to another session of CMS University. I'm really glad you're here. Thanks for spending Monday night with me. And I hope you come back next week. It's going to be something different, and that is we're going to be hosting a composer, Elaine Hagenberg, as part of our session. And I have some questions prepared to ask her, and then you will have the chance to ask her a question using the chat feature. If you don't know Elaine's music, you should check it out. It's really, really beautiful stuff. She just got awarded the Raymond Brock Commission by the American Choral Directors Association. This is one of the very highest honors in choral music. So we're really lucky to have Elaine, and thank you, Elaine, for agreeing to come on to CMS University. And so get excited. It's going to be great. So make sure you register for this session using the Eventbrite link in the description below. If you like what you're seeing, please share it with a friend, subscribe to our channel, like us, post it on Facebook, send it to a choir director friend, whatever you can do to help us get the word out. We're really proud of the work we're doing here and hope that others might find it useful as well. We're pleased to offer it for free, tuition-free, CMS University, but if you are able, we are accepting donations. So you can use, all these links are in the video description below, and your contribution would be very much appreciated. If you're watching this as a recording, or maybe you missed a session, you can always go back on our YouTube channel as well, watch a recording of a previous week. You could leave a comment there, and I'm happy to answer that as well. All right, finally, our moment of Zen, our musical palate cleanser. Tonight, we're going to listen to a piece called Lay Me Low. This is by an American composer named Kevin Siegfried, who, and it's from a set of pieces called Shaker Songs, so all Shaker tunes. And Kevin, I've done a lot of his music and hope to do much more of it in the coming years. And he writes just with a real sincerity and simplicity. He doesn't overcomplicate things. It doesn't mean his music is simple necessarily or uncomplicated, but he kind of eliminates all the extra and really writes from the heart. And I think it's beautiful. So this is a little bit of a lullaby. And the recording is by the National Lutheran Choir. And I want you to listen how they pitch their L on lay me low. They do a great job throughout. So, Kevin Siegfried's Lay Me Low. Thank you, everybody. If you're interested, all the moments of Zen that we've played so far are in a playlist on our channel, so check those out too. I hope you're doing well. I hope to see you next week. Take care and have a good night.